If you put any of that by today's standards, you wouldn't be able to do anything because it's so restrictive.
It wasn't the chandelier, the bar fall, or even Del Boy's dodgy schemes that nearly brought Only Fools and Horses to its knees. It was something far stranger, a moment so unexpected, so unsettling, that even the BBC didn't quite know what to do with it. For a show built on laughter, the scene in question felt like someone had suddenly switched off the lights in Peckham. It wasn't funny, it wasn't charming, and it definitely wasn't what fans had come to love. But it did happen, and for a brief time, it was enough to pull one of Britain's most beloved sitcoms off the air. Join us as we tell the story of the scene that crossed the line, the controversy no one saw coming, and how it forever changed the legacy of Only Fools and Horses. Behind closed doors at the BBC and the scene that almost killed the lights. There was a time when Only Fools and Horses wasn't just a TV show to audiences, it was an event to be attended. Thursday nights across Britain meant one thing for millions of folks: the trotters were on. Surprisingly, pubs would empty out early, living rooms would fill, and families of every class and accent would gather around the same flickering screen. For half an hour, the country forgot its bills, its politics, and its gray skies. All that mattered was Del Boy, Rodney, and the latest get-rich-quick disaster in Nelson Mandela House. The show didn't come out of nowhere. Britain in the early 1980s was a place of deep contradictions, hard graft, and even harder luck. The working-class dream had cracked and unemployment was rising unchecked. And by now, the optimism of the 60s felt like a memory or dream. But Only Fools and Horses didn't wallow in misery. It turned a grim reality into music, a melody of mischief, charm, and pure survival. Del Boy wasn't just a wide boy with a suitcase full of knockoffs. He was the British dreamer in its most relatable form. He believed in the impossible because, frankly, the possible hadn't worked out too well and somehow got everyone to share his beliefs. John Sullivan's writing captured something television had forgotten, that the funniest stories are often the saddest ones dressed up in laughter. He wrote not from a writer's room in Soho, but from memory of the characters, the accents, the desperation, all pulled from his own life in Balham. He gave working people their dignity back, even if it came in a three-wheeler van. The chemistry between David Jason and Nicholas Lyndhurst was lightning in a bottle. David's fast-talking confidence against Nicholas's hesitant reason created comedy alchemy. Buster Merryfield's straight-laced Uncle Albert to the mix, and you have the perfect dysfunctional family that still somehow loved each other enough to never give up. When the show hit its peak, it became more than entertainment. It was a ritual. The 1996 Christmas special, Time on Our Hands, pulled in over 24 million viewers. That's nearly half the UK population at the time, sitting in silence, laughing together, crying together, as the trotters finally found their fortune. In that moment, it wasn't just fiction, it was fulfillment. The show's humor was distinctly British, with its cheeky, irreverent, and deeply emotional theme. It didn't mock poverty, it mocked the absurdity of trying to escape it. Del's "Next year we'll be millionaires" became both a punchline and a prayer. Every time he said it, you could feel a nation quietly hoping he might be right this time. But what made Only Fools and Horses truly special wasn't the gags or the catchphrases. It was how it made the audience feel. When Del Boy fell through the bar, people laughed till they cried. When Granddad died, they cried till they laughed again. The show danced effortlessly between humor and heartbreak, which is a rare kind of storytelling that made life's struggles feel almost poetic. And that balance, the ability to find laughter in life's hardest moments, is what made the show untouchable. At least for a while, because as the seasons rolled on and the world outside began to change, the laughter started to sound different. There were whispers in the BBC offices, uneasy notes among the crew, and a growing question from fans: could Only Fools and Horses stay timeless if the times themselves had changed? No one knew it yet, but behind the laughter and the live audiences, something was brewing. something that would shake the show to its very core. Success is a funny thing. When a show becomes too beloved, it stops belonging to the people who made it and starts belonging to everyone else. By the early 1990s, Only Fools and Horses wasn't just a hit, it was an institution. Every episode was treated like national news. The BBC knew it had a gold mine, but that gold mine came with a weight, the pressure to keep it perfect. Inside Broadcasting House, the show had become a careful balancing act. Producers, editors, and executives all walked the same tightrope that demanded they protect the magic, not break the charm, and above all, not offend the millions who saw the Trotters as family. On the surface, Only Fools looked effortless, but behind closed doors, things were getting tense. John Sullivan had always written from instinct, not formula. He believed comedy had to breathe and that it needed honesty, even if that honesty was uncomfortable. But the BBC had begun tightening the screws. New policies on taste and decency were rolling in, and the early ripples of political correctness would soon reshape British TV. Suddenly, jokes that once passed with a wink and a laugh were underlined in red scenes were debated, lines were softened, and moments that John thought emotionally necessary were now labeled as being potentially problematic. It wasn't censorship in the old-fashioned sense. It was something subtler, a quiet fear that maybe Only Fools had reached a point where it could offend by simply existing. Inside the writers' meetings, arguments began to surface. The show was changing into a darker, more sentimental tone. John wanted to reflect that the Trotters were aging, that life wasn't as simple as Del's bravado made it seem, but the BBC wanted the laughs, the comfort, the guaranteed Christmas magic. One executive allegedly said during a script meeting, "People want the chandelier, not the shadows." Still, he pushed forward. He began experimenting and testing boundaries through character development, new tones, and moments that stripped away the show's safety net. He wanted to show the pain behind the punchlines, and that's where things started to get complicated. The episode in question, the one that would later stir so much controversy, was, on paper, meant to be harmless. A character-driven story with a few emotional beats, nothing more. But as filming began, there were murmurs among the crew. Certain scenes felt unusually heavy, the jokes slower, the tone uneasy. It wasn't that it wasn't funny, it just didn't feel like Only Fools and Horses. According to studio notes and production gossip that leaked years later, one particular scene was raising eyebrows. It touched on something raw, something real, the kind of subject that comedy rarely dares to touch. John, ever the storyteller, believed it needed to stay the BBC. On the other hand, believed it needed to disappear. Meetings were called, scripts were redacted, alternate cuts were made, and still, he refused to back down. He reportedly told a producer, "If we're telling the truth, we can't flinch when it gets uncomfortable." But the truth, as it turned out, was exactly what the network feared most. By the time the final edit was handed in, the BBC had a decision to make. Air the episode as written, risking complaints, backlash, headlines, or step in and quietly shelve it until further notice. For a few anxious weeks, that's exactly what happened. The Trotters were national treasures because they were funny, lovable, and very British at their core. But John needed people to know that even the funniest characters deserved to show their cracks. The turning point came in 1986, when the BBC scheduled a feature-length Christmas special titled A Royal Flush. It was meant to show Del Boy trying to rise above his station, a classic fish-out-of-water story about class, pride, and misplaced ambition. On paper, it was a perfect setup. But as production rolled on, small creative differences began to surface. Unlike most episodes, A Royal Flush was filmed without a live audience, a decision driven by scheduling and logistics that seemingly minor change would have a huge impact. Without a live crowd reacting in real time, the performances lost their rhythm. Comedy timing is music, and laughter is its accomplice. Without it, the episode's beats felt strange, pauses too long, jokes landing too flat. Then came the editing. The BBC trimmed parts of the episode to fit the Christmas broadcast window, cutting key moments of warmth that balanced Del Boy's more overbearing side. When the final cut aired, viewers saw a version of Del they didn't recognize. He was now pushy, tone-deaf, and even cruel. The episode's intended message about class insecurity got lost beneath a wave of discomfort. In living rooms across Britain, audiences were left stunned. Letters poured into the BBC. Some viewers said it felt like Only Fools and Horses had lost its heart. Even David Jason later admitted he wasn't happy with how Del came across, calling it an episode that never quite worked. Inside the BBC, there was no scandal, no official ban, but there was a realization. The magic of Only Fools was delicate. It depended on the balance of warmth and wit, realism and escapism, and that balance could tilt faster than anyone expected. From that point on, John and the production team were determined to never let that happen again. Every future episode was carefully refined, with each laugh tested against its emotional weight. The show would continue to evolve, but the lesson of a royal flush stayed with it forever. While that scene didn't knock the show off the air, it had fans debating which moment came closest. Over the years, a handful of episodes have gained reputations for crossing lines, touching nerves, or sparking small-scale BBC controversy. The most talked-about example became A Royal Flush. The fallout came fast. Within days, newspapers ran letters from fans who felt betrayed. "Del Boy's lost his sparkle" was the kind of line written to the Radio Times by some. Another called it too nasty for Christmas Day. For a show that had built its reputation on warmth and heart, it was a shock to the system. Viewers complained that Del Boy had gone too far. John Sullivan later admitted that A Royal Flush didn't turn out the way he intended. The episode had been filmed without a live studio audience, which was unusual for the series, and the laughter track was added afterwards, throwing off the timing. To make matters worse, the BBC had edited parts of the script to fit the Christmas schedule, cutting key moments that softened Del's character. Without those balancing scenes, Del seemed mean-spirited instead of misguided. The backlash was immediate. Critics called it the most uncomfortable Only Fools and Horses episode ever made. Even David Jason publicly said he didn't like how Del was portrayed, calling the episode a mistake. When the BBC re-aired it years later, they made subtle edits to restore some of the missing humanity, trimming the harshest dialogue and improving pacing. It's not the only time Fools and Horses brushed up against controversy. Some early episodes, particularly from the 1980s, also contained language and jokes that haven't aged well by modern standards. Terms that were once considered casual are now viewed as offensive, and the BBC has occasionally re-edited or reclassified those episodes when airing them on modern platforms. Still, the myth lives on that somewhere, somehow, there was an episode so out of line it was pulled from the air. Online forums and fan discussions only added to the mystery. Some swore they'd seen a lost episode that vanished after its first broadcast, though most of these claims stem from A Royal Flush or misremembered edits from syndicated reruns. The real consequence wasn't censorship. It was reflection. The show went quiet after A Royal Flush, and no new episodes aired in 1987. Fans began to wonder if Only Fools and Horses had reached its end. In truth, John and the crew were regrouping. He wanted to rethink the tone, rebuild the warmth, and ensure that when the Trotters returned, they'd do so as the family viewers had fallen in love with. That break turned out to be one of the best creative decisions the series ever made. When Only Fools and Horses returned in 1988 with Yuppie Love, it came roaring back to form. The episode featured one of the show's most iconic moments, which was Del Boy's fall through the bar, and a renewed sense of humor that reminded everyone why they loved the show in the first place. The darkness had passed, and Peckham was alive again. Thinking about it, A Royal Flush stands as a turning point and a reminder that even the most beloved shows can lose their footing when they drift too far from their heart. It's the rare misstep in an otherwise legendary run, and maybe that's why it fascinates fans to this day. It revealed the fragility behind the laughter that Only Fools and Horses worked, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. So, while the scene never truly took the show off the air, a royal flush did something arguably more meaningful. It reminded everyone involved that comedy, at its best, is about empathy. It's about seeing the humanity in the fool, the dreamer, and the schemer. Even when the joke falls flat in that silence and awkwardness after an uncomfortable Christmas night, only fools and horses rediscovered what made it timeless. When the laughter finally returned, after the uneasy silence that followed a royal flush, it wasn't clear what Only Fools and Horses would become. The show had weathered missteps before: awkward pacing in early seasons, budget restrictions, and lukewarm ratings. But this blow was different. For the first time, fans questioned whether Del Boy's charm had worn thin. John Sullivan, ever the craftsman, managed to bring back the humor that made audiences love the Trotters, but with deeper character insight. The laughter would return, yes, but it would come from a place of growth. Yuppie Love did just that, and it opened with Rodney trying to fit into the modern world of wine bars and pinstripe ambition, while Del Boy attempted to reinvent himself as a yuppie businessman. It was hilarious, but also quietly brilliant. The episode captured Britain's changing identity in the late 1980s, where old-school hustlers met a new age of mobile phones, designer suits, and champagne flutes. And then came that moment: Del Boy, trying to impress two women, leans coolly on a bar that suddenly opens, and he comedically falls straight through it. It's one of the most famous slapstick moments in British TV history. Perfectly timed, unexpected, and completely unforgettable. What makes it iconic isn't just the physical comedy, it's what it represents. The fall was symbolic. After stumbling in tone, Only Fools and Horses had picked itself back up with grace, humor, and humility. David Jason later revealed that the gag was inspired by a real incident he'd seen in a pub years earlier. He and Nicholas Lyndhurst practiced it over and over to get the rhythm right. The result was pure magic. When the episode aired, the laughter was back, louder than ever. The critics noticed, too. The Radio Times called it a return to form, while audiences hailed it as vintage John Sullivan. A perfect blend of wit, timing, and working-class truth. Del Boy wasn't cruel anymore. He was vulnerable, lovable, and utterly human again. But Yuppie Love did more than restore confidence. It evolved the series. The late 80s episodes leaned into realism with surprising emotional weight. Stories about failed dreams, family struggles, and aging ambitions began to appear beneath the humor. His writing matured, reflecting Britain itself, a country transitioning from Thatcher-era toughness to a more self-aware, ironic age. Over the next few years, the show entered what many fans call its golden period. Episodes like The Jolly Boys outing, Stage Fright, and The Chance of a Lunchtime weren't just funny, they were storytelling masterclasses. Each character grew richer, each a moment more layered. Del Boy's brash confidence started to crack, showing the quiet loneliness beneath. Rodney became more than the straight man. He became the moral compass. Even supporting characters like Trigger, Boise, and Uncle Albert developed dimensions that sitcoms rarely explore. It wasn't just about jokes anymore. It was about survival, pride, and the stubborn hope that next time, the Trotters really would be millionaires by this time next year. By the early 1990s, Only Fools and Horses had transcended sitcom status. It became a national tradition, part of Britain's collective identity. Christmas specials became events, families gathered around the television, and Del Boy's catchphrases entered everyday speech. What began as a modest BBC comedy about two dodgy market traders had grown into something bigger, a reflection of working-class resilience, humor, and heart. And it all started with that second wind, the final deals, and the end that made history. By the mid-1990s, Only Fools and Horses had made vast waves. The show that had started with wobbly ratings and a skeptical BBC had evolved into the crown jewel of British television, but even legends have to close shop one day. John Sullivan, who had steered the show for more than a decade, began to feel that the story of Del and Rodney was nearing its natural end. The brothers had hustled, failed, and dreamed for so long that the audience had seen them at their highest highs and lowest lows. To end it properly, he wanted something poetic, something final. That finale arrived in the form of the legendary Christmas trilogy of 1996's Heroes and Villains, Modern Men, and Time on Our Hands. It began, fittingly, with Del and Rodney doing what they'd always done, dreaming big and falling hard. Dressed as Batman and Robin for a fancy dress party, the two burst through the misty Peckham streets to accidentally foil a mugging, one of the funniest and most beloved moments in sitcom history. It was classic Only Fools, absurd, heartfelt, and deeply emotional all at once. But beneath the laughs, there was a growing sense of farewell. He had layered the trilogy with themes of aging, change, and what happens when the dream finally comes true. And then, after years of setbacks, the impossible happens. In Time on Our Hands, Del and Rodney discover a long-forgotten pocket watch in their garage. The same watch their late grandfather had once mentioned. It goes up for auction, and the hammer falls at an astonishing £6.2 million. After a lifetime of schemes, heartache, and broken promises, the Trotters finally became millionaires. It was more than just a TV moment. It was a national event. When Time on Our Hands aired on the 29th of December, 1996, over 24 million people tuned in. That made it the most-watched television episode in British history, a record that still stands for a scripted comedy. Viewers wept and cheered as Del Boy quietly told his brother, "We're millionaires, Rodney. We're millionaires." It wasn't just the characters who felt the weight of that line. It was the audience who had spent 15 years with them, hoping they'd one day catch a break. The ending was perfect. The Trotters drove off into the sunset in their battered yellow Reliant, wealth finally in hand, but still the same old dreamers at heart. It felt like closure, honest, earned, and poetic. Even David Jason admitted that filming those scenes was emotional. He said years later that it felt like saying goodbye to family. Nicholas Lyndhurst agreed, saying, "You could feel the love in the room from the crew, the audience, everyone. We knew we were part of something that would never happen again." John Sullivan, true to his craft, didn't gloat. He simply said he was grateful that Britain had taken the Trotters to heart. For him, the show was never about money or fame. It was about love, perseverance, and laughter in the face of hardship. And with that, Only Fools and Horses bowed out at the height of its power. Of course, the BBC later revived it for specials in the early 2000s, a lighter, nostalgic fare that gave fans a chance to revisit Peckham once more. But for many, that 1999 finale remains the true ending, the one that struck the perfect chord between comedy and emotion. It wasn't just the end of a sitcom. It was the end of an era, a moment when Britain laughed and cried together, one last time, for a pair of underdogs who'd finally made good. Beyond Peckham, what happened to the cast and creators after Only Fools and Horses? When the credits rolled on Time on Our Hands, Britain didn't just say goodbye to a sitcom, it said goodbye to a family. For 15 years, Del Boy, Rodney, Uncle Albert, and the rest of the Peckham gang had been more than television characters. While the show ended, it wasn't the end of its people. Many of its cast and creators carried that magic into new projects, while others quietly faded from the limelight, leaving behind legacies far bigger than fame. Few actors have ever embodied a character so completely as David Jason did with Del Boy. The swagger, the charm, and the comic timing made Del a living, breathing symbol of British resilience. But his career didn't end when the three-wheeled van drove off into the sunset. If anything, it entered a second golden age. Almost immediately after Only Fools and Horses wrapped, he returned to another beloved role as Detective Inspector Jack Frost in A Touch of Frost. The ITV drama, which had started running during Only Fools' later years, became a national institution in its own right. His portrayal of the weary but warm-hearted detective proved his dramatic range. Between 1992 and 2010, A Touch of Frost ran for 18 years and earned him multiple awards, including the BAFTA Fellowship in 2003 for his outstanding contribution to television. He also lent his voice to Danger Mouse and Count Duckula, two iconic animated series that connected him to generations of children. Off-screen, he became known for his humility and quiet nature. He rarely searches for publicity, preferring to let his work speak for him. Even into his later years, he continued to appear in documentaries and retrospectives, celebrating the legacy of Del Boy and the impact it had on British culture. For Nicholas Lyndhurst, playing Rodney Trotter meant living perpetually in the shadow of Del Boy, and yet he gave the younger brother a depth that balanced the entire series. His awkward grace, moral center, and flashes of pride turned Rodney into one of British comedy's most sympathetic figures. After the show's original finale, he chose a quieter career path. He appeared in several successful sitcoms, including Goodnight Sweetheart, where he played a man who time-traveled between 1990s London and World War II-era Britain. The show proved his versatility. He later appeared in After You've Gone, Rockin' Chips, which was a prequel to Only Fools, and even voiced animated characters. Tragically, in 2020, his son Archie, who was an actor best known for CBBC's So Awkward, passed away suddenly at the age of 19. The loss deeply affected him, and he further became withdrawn from the spotlight. David Jason and other cast members publicly expressed support, calling him family forever. When Buster Merrifield joined the cast in 1985 as Uncle Albert, he was stepping into the void left by the death of Leonard Pierce, who had played Granddad. It was a daunting task, but he made the role his own, turning the war-scarred sailor into a lovable symbol of nostalgia and mischief. What made Merrifield remarkable was his life before acting. He didn't become an actor until his 60s. Before that, he worked as a bank manager and an amateur boxer, a real-life story of perseverance that mirrored the show's themes. After Only Fools and Horses, he continued acting in small roles and theater productions, but his legacy was sealed. When he passed away in 1999, tributes poured in from across the country. The BBC even dedicated a special documentary, The Story of Only Fools and Horses, to honor him. Today, fans still smile when they hear his signature line, "During the war," knowing it came from a man who lived life with the same grit and humor as the character he played his predecessor, Leonard Pierce. Though only part of the show for its first 3 series, remains one of Only Fools and Horses' most enduring figures. His gentle confusion and quiet wisdom helped establish the show's tone. He was a seasoned stage actor before joining the cast, having worked alongside Laurence Olivier and other theater greats. Tragically, he passed away suddenly in 1984, between filming episodes of Series 4. Rather than recast or ignore his absence, John Sullivan wrote an emotional farewell episode titled Strained Relations, allowing Del and Rodney to grieve on screen. The result was one of the most moving moments in sitcom history, and a testament to how real these characters felt. No figure looms larger over Only Fools and Horses than its creator, John Sullivan. A South Londoner from a working-class background, he wrote from experience, drawing inspiration from market traders, neighbors, and family conversations he'd overheard growing up. He was working as a BBC props assistant when he submitted a script for Citizen Smith, which launched his writing career, but it was Only Fools and Horses that turned him into a legend. Every line, every nuance, every catchphrase came from his pen. After Only Fools, he created several other shows, including Just Good Friends, Dear John, and The Green Green Grass, which is a spin-off following Boycie and Marlene in the countryside. He also wrote Rockin' Chips, a 2010 prequel series exploring Del Boy's youth and the Trotter family's origins, starring James Buckley as the young Del. Tragically, he passed away in 2011 at the age of 64. following a short illness. His death marked the end of an era for British television. Cast members described him as the greatest comedy writer of his generation, a man who captured working-class Britain with authenticity, warmth, and soul. His writing didn't just make people laugh, it made them feel seen. He gave dignity to the dreamers, wit to the underdogs, and poetry to the ordinary. And for that, his work will forever be remembered in British sitcom history. What do you think of the show's legacy? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To enjoy more exciting videos, click play on the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video drops.